Jeff Miller, the Vice President of Health and Safety of the NFL, appearing in some kind of congressional committee linked CTE and football. And I said to Andrew Gumling, I said, let's try to get Roger Cossack, who are our legal analyst here at ESPN, and see how that affects the payout or if it affects the payout that the NFL is going to have to pay the older players. So Roger joins us now. Roger, will it affect anything?
It's a great question. I've been thinking about it, and I don't think it will. Remember, there was a settlement in this lawsuit by the vast majority of the players, and then there were some who decided they didn't want to settle and went forward with their own lawsuit. So what you're really talking about here is, a couple things. One is, are they going to get more money for this? And two, is the National Football League in a worse position? In thinking about it, it's one of those things you end up thinking about, about smoking. There came a time when everybody said you shouldn't smoke, but, who didn't know you shouldn't smoke? And it's one of those things you think about football, whatever the NFL was denying or, denying the science, who just by watching it didn't know that this was causing the kinds of problems they were complaining about. So I don't think it's going to cause much of a ripple in terms of reopening or more liability for the football league.
See, what I look at it from this, Roger, is the ignorance of the player is one thing, but when the league was denying, their ignorance, I think, was even worse because they're the ones making the decision to send the player back out there, allowing him to play in the next game after he suffered a concussion. So I would think the players back in the day, that was their argument. More than lack of knowledge for themselves is, I'm suing you because your lack of knowledge put me in peril.
Well, but it's more than lack of knowledge. I mean, one of the things that they always claimed was that the National Football League knew and denied it, even though they knew. Now they've taken a different position. They say, well, recent science has shown us and convinced us, and, look, science is... you can't argue with it. And now we admit it, and we admit that which they should have done all along. I mean, eventually you're going to end up, I think, with something that's, I think is pretty apparent right now. You play football at your own risk. And actually the question that you're going to eventually get to with me is, well, what's going to happen about that? Are we going to have football? Should the government allow that kind of an occupation where these kinds of things can happen, even if going in that it could happen, and so you're all over the board on that kind of thing. Look, if we know that in buildings where there was asbestos, the government came in and said, you can't have that anymore, and there were all kinds of asbestos lawsuits, and they made them change it, and they made people take out asbestos, which was at a time something that everybody thought was good for you, or not, at least not good for you, but had a purpose to prevent fires. You can think of a million different things that people do that are dangerous, that can cause severe injuries, and they do them. So eventually what you're going to have here is the ultimate question, which I think right now is going to be asked. Does football continue? And if it does, in what state does it continue? And do we do anything about it?
Well, it's interesting because my wife always says to me, Roger, if somebody invented this game today, people would say, no way. There's just no way that would play. But I'm looking at what the NFL, although the NFL is trying to backpedal just a little bit on what Miller said, I say they have now removed all liability from themselves. Now it's on the players. And we had Shannon Sharp on yesterday, Roger, and he said, if he knew at the start of his career what he knows now, of course he would still play. It's given him a life, and it's given him the ability to give his grandmother a life that she never would have had. So I think people, as long as people are in tough economic situations, they're going to play football.
You ever seen those pictures in the 40s of those guys building the skyscrapers, sitting on those I-beams out over nothing? And you look at them, and your hands get sweaty just looking at them. People do things that need to be done, and so like I say, it's like smoke. Who didn't know you shouldn't smoke? You ever seen those guys ride the bulls? I mean, in rodeos. I mean, people do things. Now, when do we, as a society, or do we, ever step in and say, you cannot do this? Now, what's going to happen, and I think in some ways, is the market's going to talk. I mean, you see now, from what I've read, there is, there's a greater concern now in youth football. Young people playing football. Listen, if my son is certainly grown, but if he was in the house today and he was in high school and he wanted to play football, I wouldn't allow it. I'd take the heat and wouldn't allow it. I think a lot of people are beginning to feel that way. So you're going to see a turn of a market, and the question is who will continue to play. And the answer to that sometimes is socioeconomic. People who need it do it, and others who don't have to do it don't do it.